Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the last event in the Metro Detroit Book and Author Society Fall Series. We are here with Mallory O'Meara. Yes, we're here with Mallory O'Meara today to talk about her book, Girly Drinks. And as you know, if you've been to any of these events before, I'm going to talk for like 5 minutes. You can tune it up. You can go get a drink before we talk about Girly Drinks while I'm doing my spiel. But make sure you are back for our actual conversation because it's going to be fabulous. I am so excited. But before we get there, thank you again for coming to this Book and Author Society event. You may previously know us as Metro Detroit Book and Author Society. We dropped the Metro Detroit. We are all on Zoom now. You do not have to be local to come to our events. So keep coming. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are not young enough to be on TikTok. Maybe one day. Subscribe to our newsletter. That's where you will find all of the information about our upcoming winter series. For those of you who remember us from our in-person events, we're sorry, there is still a pandemic, but we hope to maybe have something coming up. So again, subscribe to all of those feeds. That's where you will find out the information. And that is where we will announce new things when we go back to giving grants, go back to having in-person luncheons, and when we announce new author Zoom events, which are so fun because you can attend in your pajamas. And that is fantastic. So I think that might be all I have today, other than if you are absolutely inspired by this talk and want to buy Mallory's book. We do not partner with any local bookshops right now, though we really encourage you to shop local. So shop your indies as much as possible. Go to your library, check out from there, or use our bookshop.org affiliate link. We get a small kickback from it, and it is supporting a local independent bookstores for your area or our area. And that is really fantastic. So that link will be dropped in the chat several times tonight, and I'll remind you again at the end of the program. But really, we encourage you to buy Mallory's book and do all of your bookish shopping local this holiday season and soon, very soon. I just got some books I ordered about a month ago in the mail today. So, be careful. Sorry, Mallory, you probably think I'm insane at this point.
No, I mean, shipping's rough. Me and my boyfriend just got a Halloween card that somebody had sent us.
Ooh, so, that is a little rough.
Have patience with your local bookstores, folks. Shipping is rough right now.
But whatever books you're ordering, they are super worth it, especially Mallory's books. So tonight we have the wonderful Mallory O'Meara. I am going to look off to the side to read all of my notes, Mallory. So if I look a little unfocused, that's what's happening. I'm sure most of our viewers are used to me and my weird stand. So Mallory is an award-winning and best-selling author and historian. She lives with her 2 cats in the mountains near Los Angeles, where she is at work on her next nonfiction book, and bourbon is her drink of choice. Her first book, The Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Millicent Patrick, is a Los Angeles Times bestseller. It won the 2019 Skiba Award for Bibliography, the Rodeo 2019 Book of the Year, and was nominated for the Hugo and Locust Awards. Her second book, Girly Drinks, A Feminist History of Women and Alcohol, was just released. Every week, Mallory hosts the literary podcast Reading Glasses alongside filmmaker and writer Brea Grant. The show is hosted by Maximum Fun and focuses on book culture and reader life. So if you're a podcast person, please subscribe to her podcast as well. It is what you're looking for in your life. And my only other little bit today is we have a Q&A. We will be asking questions in the second half of this program. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask whatever questions you want. We will try to answer them in the best fashion possible. And that is the best thing about these Zoom events. We can have these one-on-one conversations and we can let you talk with these fantastic authors and find out all of those little things that you can't necessarily get from their Twitter accounts or from in-person book events. So please use the Q&A feature. All right, Mallory, I think I have babbled enough. How are you tonight?
I am fantastic. How are you doing?
I am great. So I have read your book 1.5 times now. And
which is pretty impressive, I will say, since it just came out.
I read it, of course, leading up to this program. And then I was sitting down with it over the last few days thinking, because I am the type of person that will have an audiobook going and then we'll go back to my physical copy and then never know where something is in a book. And I was like, I found this fantastic quote and I want to use it in this program. And then, of course, I could never find it. So I'm just skimming through your book now, being like, there's this fantastic part where you talk about women bringing about the apocalypse by drinking, or that's what men will think. Yes. And I thought that just felt so in line with the last few weeks and with 2021.
I think the line you're looking for is in chapter 2 in the ancient world chapter.
I totally missed it the second time over too.
It's all good. There's a lot of stuff in there.
There's a lot, and it's really, really interesting. How did you go about kind of putting this together? Because it's very, very well researched and you organize it in a really interesting way.
It was tough to put this book together because it is a world history. So I wanted to make sure that I was covering all parts of the world at all time periods, which is a tall order. So I ended up reading somewhere between 500 and 700 different books, articles, thesis papers, watching documentaries, interviewing people. There's a lot going on because I wanted to make sure that I was putting everything into context. I didn't want to just regurgitate a bunch of very cool, oh no, I'm really sorry in advance if one of my cats bursts in here. I'm so sorry.
We love
like a horror movie. If you see my door start to open, it's not a ghost. It's one of my cats.
We love a good animal on Zoom. We've all been working from home.
I'm so sorry.
You're good.
Honestly, she could probably give a good talk. She's always around for all of my writing. Come here. So yes, I wanted to put everything in context. I didn't want to just regurgitate a bunch of alcohol facts. I wanted to make sure that I was explaining to the readers why these things were happening. Because I wanted to answer these questions. How do drinks become gendered? Because it's a drink. Like how does a drink have a gender? It's like a toilet. How does a toilet have a gender? Why women were allowed to drink, when they weren't, what they were allowed to drink. So I wanted to make sure that I was putting this into context. So I read all these books about alcohol history and feasting history and partying history and economics and culinary history, but at the same time also reading books about women's history. So I wanted to know what was going on, how what they were drinking and where they were drinking reflected what was going on with women's rights at that time period, at that part of the world. So it was a task. It was a lot of reading, but it was so interesting, and I'm such a nerd about cocktail and alcohol culture that it was a blast.
Does that mean you were the person that put the drink pairings on your website for the chapter?
It was.
Love that.
Yes, my website has a drink pairing for each chapter of the book, which goes without saying, please do not read the entire book at once. It has a Spotify playlist of all of the women-centric drinking songs that I listened to while I was writing it. Has a list of recipe books that are written by women that I recommend. There's a lot of cool extra girly drink stuff on there.
It's so cool. And that gives you a way to incorporate all of this incredible research you did. Do you want to talk a little bit about what inspired you to write Girly Drinks? I know in your introduction you touch on it a little bit, but for those of you who have not been spending all of your time with the book like me. Girly Drinks came about the way that every project I work on comes about, because I'm a huge nerd. And whenever I get into anything, I want to read about it. It's the first thing I want to do. I go straight to the library. I very much come from the Hermione Granger school of life. So when I first moved to Los Angeles, almost 6 years ago, good gosh, as a housewarming present, my very best friend, who's a huge cocktail nerd, as a housewarming present, got me a home cocktail set with a recipe book and a bar spoon and a shaker and all that stuff. And I got really, really into it, which is weird because I hate cooking, but I loved making cocktails. I would rather eat a can of tuna for dinner, but then I'll spend an hour making a cocktail. It's very weird. So the more I got into making these cocktails, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I had never really realized how much goes into drinking and drinking culture and cocktails. Is so much science and art and history. There's just a lot of cool stuff in there. So I did what I always do. I wanted to read about it, and I
ordered from the library and bought all these cocktail history books. And after reading about 2 or 3 of them, I noticed that it was all men's history. There were no women mentioned. And I was like, that's weird. Don't like that. And it just started to frustrate me. And I was complaining about it to my best friend, said best friend. And she said, yeah, you're right. The book that you're looking for, A Women's History of Drinking and Alcohol, doesn't exist, and you're going to have to write it. And I was working on my first book, Lady from the Black Lagoon, at the time. And I thought, oh, well, okay, here we go. This is my next project. And I was very lucky because my editor, Peter Joseph, at Hanover Square Press, my publisher, is a huge cocktail nerd. So when we were talking about what I wanted to do next, I had mentioned that to him, and he was like, yes, let's do it. And Girly Drinks was born.
Well, we need to thank your best friend, because this is a fantastic concept. And it's also the type of history that is so important to be telling right now. All of these marginalized voices and all of these hidden voices throughout history. And you do such a great job of going back through the eras and saying, hey, no women were here.
Yeah, we were. That was my goal of the book, really. I want myself, selfishly, of course, but also I just want all women to always be comfortable where they want to be. I want women to know that they belong wherever they want to be. And you don't really, especially today where, we think of alcohol as it's a luxury item. It's a fun thing that you do on the weekends, or maybe, after work is done or whatever. But up until very, very recently in history, alcohol was a really important part of the global economy, of people's diets. It was just like a very important part of our culture. And even today, like, it's such an important, during the pandemic, it's been a little bit different, but bars and drinking are such a huge part of American socialization. So to not include women in that is just silly to me. It's like just bad history. It's just, it's ridiculous.
One of your early chapters around the Middle Ages too, you start to talk about how this is a space for women to make money in an era where women do not make money. And I'm kind of a medieval history nerd, and I'm like, I didn't know that.
Pretty cool. It's extremely cool. Well, but that was the whole thing, right? Is like, it's one thing to just be like, hey, women completely controlled brewing and beer during, medieval Western Europe time. Like, absolutely. It's cool enough to leave that there. But I think it's more important to tell people the reason for that is because it was a trade that you could do at home. You could do while watching your kids, while making dinner. You didn't need any specialized ingredients besides the stuff you already had in your kitchen. You didn't need any special training or apprenticeship. It was like such an accessible trade that was very, very domestic and very kitchen oriented, which is so funny to me because everyone now thinks of beer as like, Animal House. It's like a manly man thing that you do at the bar. But for most of history, beer was like a very, very home centric thing. And so that's why women completely controlled this trade. And it was literally the only trade like that. And that's why it's just so cool to learn. I mean, it's sad that it was taken away from them, because as soon as any trade becomes commercially viable in any way, men are like, oh, hey, cool, thanks, we're going to take that from you. Bye, we're going to go get some money. But it's so cool to think of, like, this is how it wasn't just like women getting drunk. It was women taking care of their babies and their families and their communities through beer.
It was so cool to see that, and to see that type of commerce and that type of trade life in what you usually see, especially like historical fiction or just panhandlers and women sewing and doing those things. You don't see women especially being that industrious.
Yes, but you should, because they were super industrious. And beer was, again, back then, it was part of your diet. You needed those calories. It was just like bread. It was a diet staple. So it was a really important thing for them to make.
One of your first 3 chapters, I think, is on beer, and you spend a lot of time with a nun named Hildegard. Am I right on
Hildegard,
that?
yes. She so she was sort of ended up becoming what we would think of today as like the queen of IPAs, because she was really one of the people who popularized the use of hops in beer. And it's just so funny to me that today we think of beer, of hop, especially like hoppy IPA beer, as like the most manly man, lots of beards and flannel, when it was a nun who popularized it and loved drinking hoppy beer.
She was fantastic. I'm sure her story kind of fell to the surface when you were going through all of your sources. Was everyone that easy to pinpoint? For each of your chapters focuses in a woman in an era to kind of pair everything together. So was
Yeah,
everything that easy to pair?
some of them were, some of them weren't. It was something that developed really early on. It was going to just be a straightforward history. And my editor, who is a genius, he was like, why don't we pick one woman for each chapter as sort of the main character of her time period? And I was like, awesome. She can kind of guide you. And I wanted to make sure that I was choosing women across the spectrum of drinking culture. I didn't want to just pick brewers. I wanted to pick drinkers and distillers and bartenders and bootleggers and women who were active in all parts of alcohol culture. And Hildegard was tough, and I ended up having to split it into 2 chapters because the woman who comes after her, Li Qingzhao, who was one of China's greatest poets and was very famous, but also infamous for writing about women drinking and herself drinking. They were really close together in time, but I couldn't choose between the 2 of them because they were both so cool. So I ended up doing 2 chapters on the Middle Ages. Hildegard's the earlier one, and Li Qingzhao is the later Middle Ages. But so some women stuck out like that, and I had to choose them. Other women, like the Prohibition chapter is the biggest chapter in the book. And there were just so many amazing women that I went back and forth so many times on who to center. It was just like an embarrassment of riches of cool ladies. So there was no chapter where I had a hard time finding a woman. It was more, oh my God, I love you all. You're all my friends in my head. How do I pick? But I'm very happy with my choices. I don't regret any of them.
They flow well. You mentioned your Prohibition chapter. That was another section where I spent a lot of time. I guess surprise is the correct word. And you touch on this too, that through popular history, we link suffrage and the temperance movement hand in hand. There is a whole Ken Burns documentary telling you that. So I was on a walk listening to my audiobook, and you dropped the mic with the whole not all suffrage was temperance. No. What is this history? And I paused in front of a neighbor's house. I'm like, they're going to see me looking like a crazy person.
They're like, there's this very strange lady out here who's yelling about suffrage. We don't know what to do. Exactly.
But did you come across a lot of surprises like that while you were writing?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's the surprise throughout the whole book was how much there were, just how much great history. Because again, I have 2 full shelves of cocktail history books, and most of them, if they talk about them, barely touch on it. Again, almost every written history of alcohol and drinking culture really only mentions women in a big way when it comes to Prohibition in regards to the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was the, sort of the mouthpiece for the female temperance movement. But in reality, there were not only way more women on the other side of things, there were just lots of women in general during that time period doing a lot of really cool things. The main character of that chapter, Gertrude Cleo Lithgow, she was the most famous and successful international bootlegger at the time. And the fact that history books do not mention her is shocking to me. I mean, when I originally pitched this book to my editor, I had sent him an outline, and I ended up having to add several chapters because I pitched this book and we sold it without me doing a lot of research. So I was just sort of like writing on faith, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to come across, especially because again, I was reading all these histories and there wasn't that much there. And all I had was that I knew that it had to be crap. It's like, there's no possible way that women are not involved here. I just know it. So that's all I had. So I was completely stunned when I started researching and realized there was not just more, but so much more in every in every time period, in every part of the world. And I was just continuously stunned by the innovation of women, the moxie of women, like all the cool history there was there. And I mean, as frustrated as I am that these stories haven't been told before, I mean, I guess I'm grateful because I get the honor of telling them.
You do a wonderful job with that. Your last book came out fairly recently too. How long have you been working on this if you were 500 books deep in your research?
I started it, oh my gosh, Lady from the Black Lagoon. I started a little bit before Lady from the Black Lagoon came out. So that was spring of 2019. The lion's share of the research was from the fall of 2019 to the fall of 2020. So it was about a year.
Very impressive. You also,
again, this is like my full-time job. So I was literally like just like most of my days were just reading, highlighting, note-taking. It's just all I did for like, oh, sorry, my cat's back.
Fantastic. I think that's a lot of our viewers' dream job as well.
So sorry.
No, we drop my dog off at my parents during these events because he needs to be next to me and then he needs to bark when he is alarmed. So
yeah, that's really the thing, is that if I don't leave, if she isn't in here, she would be crying outside. She has to be with me at all times.
I think everyone understands now. The pets run the house and we haven't left the house, so they think they're in charge.
So sorry.
You try to really incorporate world history in this too. This is not just a westernized history. Did you have a harder time finding research on certain areas, or was it mostly Western history you were coming across and you had to dig?
I definitely had to dig. A lot of Chinese history was the one that was in particular the most difficult, especially since I don't speak Chinese. I don't speak any of the any Chinese language. So there was a few times where I had to do a lot of digging. That's part of the reason why things took so long. It was just making sure, because I didn't want to leave anybody out as much as I could. Mm-hmm. And so I just had to find interviews, find translations, find documentaries in English, find articles in English, find books in English. But it was worth it. It was tough. There was a lot of moments where I was very, very frustrated and wishing that I was like a superhero that could understand all languages. But also, a lot of these histories have not been written, because the most frustrating part is not even with myself and not being multilingual. It's because so much of women's history happened in the home. A lot of women throughout history in different time periods were not literate, were not either able to write or allowed to write. So a lot of those, especially with like Black history in America, a lot of the early history there is like oral history, or the written histories that were there were written by white people, and their accounts of things are at best unhelpful and at worst just like absolutely racist and like unusable because it's just bad history. So it's stuff like that. It's a lot of as a history person, you have to be very careful where you're getting information from. So that's where a lot of the frustration was, just a lot of extra reading, extra digging, but worth it.
All right. Was it very different from when you were working on Lady in the Black Lagoon?
Yes. Working to tell Millicent Patrick's story, again, only took place in one country, which was very different. But it was just a much more deep dive. It was also a more emotional journey, because Lady from the Black Lagoon has a lot of memoir elements to it. It's sort of like Julie and Julia, but for weirdos. So I didn't have to do that with Girly Drinks. There's no memoir elements to it. So it was just a very different writing process. Less crying, less emotion. And it wasn't, I didn't have one woman living in my head for 3 years. So it was just, there were parts that were easy. It was easy. Girly Drinks was easier emotionally, but harder from a research standpoint.
That's really interesting too, especially since for Girly Drinks, you're kind of taking on like this whole of women's history, but it's not just one person for you. Yeah,
it was zoomed out way far.
Do you have a favorite woman from Girly Drinks?
I do. It's hard to, it's definitely very hard to pick, because I love them all. And again, they're all my friends in my head. Even though some of them are not alive anymore. Most of them are not alive anymore, I should say. But I would have to say that my favorite woman in the book is Bessie Williamson in the 1960s and 70s chapter. She was the first and so far only female general manager of the Lefroy Scotch distillery. And also she was this, I'm so sorry. That is my cat. Only my boyfriend takes care of this, but he's also doing a Zoom meeting right now in another room. So that's what it's like having pets and working.
I hope the cat's going back and forth and doing it to both of you.
Yes, I hope so too. But she also was sent by the Scotch Association to America to this was in the 1960s. This was the world was sort of getting the world's drinking economy was still getting its back on its feet after American Prohibition, and she was basically tasked with taking all of her passion and enthusiasm for Scotch and going to America and consulting with liquor store owners and bar owners and saying, look, I know you're drinking, you don't care about single malt Scotch, but you really should. This was a time when people were drinking blended Scotches. People didn't care about single malt Scotches at all. They thought Laphroaig was too powerful to be drank on its own. And she was the one who really was tasked with going and convincing people otherwise. And nowadays we know that single malt Scotch is the big deal. It's what people spend a lot of money on. So part of that is because of Bessie. And I love her so much because we all think of, when we think of Scotch, we think of Nick Offerman. We think of people with beards. We think of super very stereotypically masculine things, but really it was this middle-aged Scottish woman with cat eye glasses and a cardigan and lots of wool and tweed and comfy shoes who really was the ambassador for Scotch.
Fantastic. Just an inspiration.
I love her so much. She's one of the people that if I could have a drink with anybody alive or dead, she would be one of them.
That reminds me, when you get to the chapter on more of the quintessential girly drinks, and you do continue to mention why is it that people do not want to drink these sugary, fruity drinks that actually taste good?
Yeah.
that always struck me too, because it does feel like something that you can go to a bar and I am perfectly fine to order a very frilly mojito or a Cosmo, but my husband is stuck with his beer, and that's probably good for him, but
yeah, it's just so silly. That's the thing that frustrates me so much about the gendering of drinking, is that it often means that nobody gets to have what they really want. A great example, my boyfriend's father loves the frillier, fruitier, sweeter, brighter, more garnished drink, the better. But if a lot of men specifically don't want to order those drinks, or sometimes bartenders will make fun of men who order those drinks, and vice versa. When a lot of times when we go out to eat, which admittedly is not as often as it was a couple years ago, but I always order a bourbon, and very often bartenders when they bring it to the table, or the waiter or waitress, they will give that bourbon to my boyfriend, and I'm like, nope, that's my drink, thank you. But it's just that sometimes it's unconscious bias.
We don't love it.
Especially if the people are giving my bourbon away.
No, even my husband, when we go out, I am the IPA drinker, and he will get a beer that has milkshake and marshmallow in the title. I cannot stomach it, but it is the frilliest thing you can get at a brewery. And
yes.
No.
Well, now you know that you're just like Hildegard,
Perfect. No, I related so strongly to her chapter. I loved it so much.
She's so cool.
Yeah. I think that's what really drew me into, was you started with such strong women. Not that they aren't all strong, but getting to there is this nun who encourages you to basically worship Dionysus for various points of time. And I'm like, okay, here for it.
Oh yeah, Hildegard being you have to give me my own nunnery because God told you to. Oh well, it's just so wonderful to me.
Just using that power of, well, God is talking to me now, so we're going to.
Yeah, God told me that I need my own place. Sorry, can't argue.
I think that's how the government works now, honestly.
Yeah.
I know Girly Drinks is newly out, but it seems like you're researching a ton. Are you working on another project, or is this something that we can't talk about?
Well, I am, and I am starting a book right now, starting the research for another adult nonfiction that will be a biography of a woman in history, and then I am in the middle of finishing a middle grade nonfiction book. Neither of them are announced, even though they're both going to be hopefully announced imminently. So I can't talk about specifics, but I have, again, 2 projects in the works that I'm very, very excited about. And yeah, more cool lady nonfiction.
I'm very excited for. We'll be sure to boost all of your announcements on social media.
Thank
Another
you.
reason to follow us, everyone. We will continue to do this until, I mean, it doesn't matter now. Instagram lets you post anything with a link, but there used to be a goal for that. So we are reaching the end of the year as well. And since you are apparently reading 500 books a year, running a bookish podcast, writing, do you have a year-end like favorite that you want to tout?
I do actually. It's so funny. We just did every year on my podcast at the end of the year, we do our best books of the year episode. We just recorded it. So normally November and the first part of December involves me and my co-host frantically reading all of the 2021 releases that we did not get to.
No.
Reading for 6 hours a day, just going. And if I had to pick one book that was my favorite of the year, for novels, for fiction, it would be Pieces by Helen Oyeyemi, who is one of my favorite authors.
She's fantastic. I
am completely obsessed with her. She is a sort of literary weird fiction author, and her new book is about it's a very weird, strange novel about this newlywed couple who is going on a train trip for their honeymoon, and very soon they discover that the train has very strange connections to their personal life, and it is this beautiful and brilliant and strange rumination on both breakups and relationships and being together. And I just think she's a genius. And every year that she has a new book come out is a good year, but this might be my new favorite of hers.
It's at the top of my TBR. She is one of my absolute favorites.
Oh, you are going to love it. This book is, I love all her books. I have everything she's ever written, but this one is in particular special.
So much to look forward to. Well, I guess now is a good time to remind everybody, put something in the Q&A. I have a feeling Raya will pop up as she usually does in a few moments. So if you have questions or questions throughout the rest of the program, of course, keep asking them. But until Raya is ready, we can keep chatting. How did you get to your podcast? I think for all of us here who love to talk books and all of that, I think that is probably a top of mind question.
So Bria and I have a really hilarious origin story. We had already been friends for a while before we started the show, and we were working on this film because before I was an author, I was a full-time filmmaker, and Bria is also a filmmaker as well. That's how we met and became friends. And we were out to lunch with a friend of ours who's also a filmmaker. We were talking about a project that we had been working on together, which ultimately didn't come to fruition. But while we were like waiting for the food or like looking at the menu or something, Bria and I were talking about the best reading light to use if you do not want to wake up your significant other while they're in bed with you. And Bria and I were having a very heated discussion, very excited discussion about the best types of book lights. And our friend who was with us was like, man, you guys should start a podcast about this. And we laughed. And then a couple of days later, Bria emailed me and she said, you know what? He was right. We should start a podcast about this, because we really wanted to create a show that had nothing to do, that was not about book reviews, that you could listen to no matter what books you read. If you're an e-reader, print reader, comic book reader, romance reader, horror reader, whatever kind of book you read, wherever you read it, it was not about, oh no, because there's so many book podcasts out there that I love, but if I haven't read the book, I'm like, nah, I'm going to have to wait to listen to this episode. Yeah. So we wanted something that was much more general and about reader culture and reader life more than, we always say it's a book show that's not about books. And so we started workshopping the show, and it all came together really quickly. We took it to our network, and they were like, if you're not going to talk about books, what are you going to talk about? We don't get it. And they were like, you know what? We love you guys. You guys are really good together. We don't really know how this is going to go because we don't know what you're going to talk about. But readers know there's a million things to talk about with every aspect of book culture. So, They signed us on. We signed a contract with them, and we were off to the races. And we've been going for almost 5 years now. So clearly, we do have a lot to talk about, and we have discussions about the best kind of bookmark. How do you get a book back from someone who borrowed it without being, without murdering them? How do you read in bed without waking up your spouse? So it's all questions like that. We have a blast. We do author interviews, but also we interview publicists and editors and book reviewers and other podcasters. It's definitely all about reader culture.
I'm so glad you got that opportunity and that someone believed in you for that, because I mean, we're a society that's all about readers and people that love to read and promoting literacy and things like that. And reader and book culture is so much more than the bookshelf behind you.
Absolutely. There's so much going on. We have so much fun talking about, just book etiquette and, how do you what do you do? Like, what do you do if you're not liking a book, but it's a really buzzy book and you feel like you should read it? How do you make more time to read in your day? How do you track your reading? Where's the best place to buy books? Should you try an e-reader? How do you read? What's the best way to read on vacation? There's just like so many aspects, and so much of it is fueled because Bria and I are real friends. Like when we're not recording the show, very often we are just talking about books and what we're reading and book things. Okay. So it's very organic, and we just have a great time with it. We have a great community. We actually, you'll find this funny. We have an ongoing joke on the show because it seems like a very disproportionate amount of our listeners are named Sarah. So it's just like an ongoing joke on the show that there are like, oh, one of the Sarahs, this. So one day I looked at our inbox and like the first 30 emails were from someone named Sarah. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but we have cornered the Sarah market.
There are a lot of Sarahs who are readers, and I promise you I have not emailed you 30 times in a day.
Name for Sarah.
It looks like Raya is here. Raya, do we have a bunch of questions by other
I thought I should come in and even out the Sarah quotient a little bit, just to
I love the Sarahs.
But you were talking about, talking reading with a community of people who love it. So I thought that would be a good segue into a couple of questions from our audience members. Let's start with a question from Cindy. First of all, hey, Cindy. Cindy wanted you to know, Mallory, that she loved your book and that says thank you for writing it. Wants to know, what was one of your favorite or most surprising things that you came across while doing your research?
It probably has to be the alewives and witches thing. And I've found that that's one of readers' favorite things, is that in medieval Western Europe, as we talked about before, women really controlled the brewing industry. They were called alewives, but due to a number of factors, one of them being that a competitor arose for attendance on Sundays. There was people who wanted to go to the alehouse, and then there were the churches who also wanted those butts in the seats for Sunday church. So the church and a lot of authorities at the time were very mistrustful of the alewives because they were women who had power and a means of supporting themselves financially, which was sort of unheard of during that time. They were very suspicious. People are always suspicious about women with power. It's very nerve-wracking. It makes people very, very, very nervous. So that's how alewives began to be turned into witches. If you look in a lot of medieval art, the one of the tradespeople that I think the tradesperson that is most represented, like cavorting in hell with demons, is the alewife. And when you start looking at all the different markers of an alewife, being tall hats, ale stakes, which looks like a broom, cauldrons, black cats, that's where a lot of our modern stereotypes of witches come from. And that was really cool for me because I love witches and spooky stuff. And it seems to be just something that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get is people are like, witches, they're so cool. And I'm like, yeah, beer witches, man. It's the coolest thing.
I love that. That is a great, surprising and or favorite thing from research. We have another research related question from Alexandra, who says, this is such a fascinating history. I agree. I think a lot of women's history is unknown, to be surfaced, and fascinating stuff. Do you see this research going farther in any way? So I think you sort of answered, maybe ideas for other books, but I wonder too, if you could talk about, you talked about, where the inspiration for this book came from, but like in general, how your book ideas sort of percolate or what the genesis of your book projects is.
They all start with me, my own personal curiosity, just me being selfish. And the next adult book that I'm working on definitely came from there. I was actually researching for another book and found out about this woman, and I was like, why don't I know more about her? This is nuts. I realized that no book had been written about her, so here we go. Hopefully again I'll be able to talk about who she is soon. But yes, that's really where a lot of it comes from. I think and I think a lot of female readers, marginalized readers in any way, have this experience lately. When you start to read books, nonfiction and fiction, that center who you are, it's addictive. You can't go back. What has been seen cannot be unseen. You just want, me personally, now all I want to do is read women's history and novels about women and novels by women. And because a lot of us, I feel old saying this, but when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot, and I grew up in like the age of like, oh wow, YA is a big thing. I mean, I was 9 years old when Harry Potter came out, Golden Compass, a lot of those books, which are of course very white and straight centric, but nowadays we have an even more just like incredible blossoming of people, of authors like that finally being allowed and supported to tell stories like that. So a lot of the books that I want to write are just like, it's all I want to do is think about these women and tell their stories. Like Raya, like you said, that often they're just so fascinating and so incredible. I definitely would consider exploring more in the world of alcohol culture. As I said before, the Prohibition chapter is the longest chapter in this book. It could have been the entire book if I let it. There's so many incredible women during that time, and I would love, I would definitely think about writing more in that little slice of the world.
Okay, good to know. So Alexandra, if the project slowed down just slightly for Mallory, you might see some more Prohibition stuff coming out of this. Mick wanted to say, as a librarian, thank you so much for always promoting libraries. You're welcome, Mick. I'm a librarian. Sarah's a librarian. We're all librarians, so we love libraries. So thank you for loving that we promote libraries. Which one of the women that you discuss in Girly Drinks would you like to meet the most? I think you sort of already said it, but maybe your answer is different from meeting for a drink than just meeting.
Yes. Well, first off, I do want to say I literally couldn't do what I do without libraries. This is not me tooting the horns of librarians and libraries. If I had bought those 500 books, it would have been my entire advance. I would be living in the hollow of a tree. I literally could not afford to do what I do without libraries, especially last year during the pandemic was when the lion's share of writing and research took place. And it was all because of the digital archives and digital access to libraries. And I think it was around summer was when the libraries opened back up for pickup, and librarians would haul out literally boxes of books for me. And I specifically remember the first time I went to go to the library after I'd finished the book, and I was just picking up like 2 novels that I had put on hold, and the librarian there was like, what happened to all the drunk lady books? And I was like, I finished the book. And he was like, yay, and all the librarians were cheering, probably because they didn't have to haul like boxes of 50 books out for me, but it was also really cool. So yeah, I just think I use the library every day. I use the Libby app. If you want to read sorry, my cat is back, a different cat. I'm so sorry. Hi, Sailor. If you are interested in getting the book and you cannot afford to buy it, if you can get it through your library, and I am so happy when people read my books through the library, but if your library doesn't have it, you can also ask them to. I know this is a huge, exciting thing that a lot of readers don't know, is that you can actually put in a request form at your library. Most libraries, depending on the library, some, like I know the Los Angeles Public Library, which is the one that I use the most, has a specific form on their website, but you can be like, hey, I want to read this book. Will you get it for me? And it is the greatest thing in the world. So I owe everything to libraries, libraries. So I will say that I'll change my answer a little bit for this, because there's a couple women that I wrote about in this book that are still alive that I desperately want to meet. Since the book came out, I was able to meet a couple of them, and actually the woman who's in the epilogue, Harmony Moon-Colangelo, who's the first trans woman to ever write a cocktail recipe book. I know her. So I can have a drink with Harmony, which is really cool. She's absolutely the coolest lady. But the person I would want to meet the most is Julie Reiner. I desperately tried to interview her for the book, and I was not able to. She lives and works in New York City, and it is still my sincere hope that I will get to meet her someday, because she has done so much for the world of booze. If you've not read the book yet, she is the person in the 2000s chapter, and she was one of the people on the sort of vanguard of the craft cocktail renaissance. She was really one of the 3 or 4 main bartenders getting people to drink good drinks again. And she's very notable because she's the person who really created the first mass appeal craft cocktail bar, because a lot of cocktail bars were happening at the time, but they were like, very fancy speakeasies that like fit 10 people at a time, and it was like, you had to know somebody, and it wasn't really heavily advertised, and there's a lot of bars that are still like that, and that's very cool. But Julie Reiner was like, no, I want everybody to drink cool drinks, and she made the Flatiron Lounge, which really helped get people excited and drinking craft cocktails again. She's also really cool because she went out of her way to train women to be bartenders and to welcome. Her and her wife have done so much to welcome women into alcohol culture. She just does a lot of really cool stuff in the world of booze, and she's still working and she's still alive, and I have not gotten to meet her or talk to her. So that is my answer for that. My sincere hope that I get to buy Julie Reiner a drink someday.
Okay, Mick, you heard it here first. Please, if we follow you on Twitter, maybe we'll find out if you and Julie get to meet for a drink.
The trip that I really would like to take is to visit said best friend in New York. My best friend lives in Brooklyn, and but she's I've been talking about her so much. She's the person the book is dedicated to. So if you look at the dedication, Lauren, that is my best friend. She is the most important person to me. When I go to visit her in New York next, I'm gonna try to go to Julie Reiner's bar and just hang out, see if she's around.
It's a good strategy. Speaking of traveling, so much of alcohol culture is really localized to specific places where specific things were brewed or made, or a specific ingredient comes from that is sort of integral to what we think of as, a cocktail recipe or a particular liqueur or wine or whatever your alcoholic beverage of choice is. Is there a particular place in the world? Obviously, we've all been locked inside for a long time and dreaming about travel, but is there sort of a place from your research that you'd like to go and experience the beverage in situ?
Yes. One of the very many sad things about writing a world history of a subject during an international pandemic is that I could not travel. There's a bunch of places that I really, really wanted to go to: Scotland, Ireland, Japan, Korea. There's a lot of places I really wanted to go to, but I think the place that I most wanted to go to and interview someone, luckily I was able to connect with her via email. It's always very exciting. I don't know if either of you ever had this happen, where you just email someone out of the blue and they respond. You're like, oh my God, hugest thing. But the last chapter in the book, Apiwe Mawela, she's the first Black woman in South Africa to found a microbrewery, and she has a company called Brewster's Craft that is specifically about training women on how to make beer, and especially African brewing techniques with using African ingredients. And I so desperately wanted to go and meet her because she's super cool, but I really wanted to go to her. She has her own brand of beer, and I like using African ingredients with African brewing techniques. I so wanted to go and taste the beer because it does not ship to the US. And she does so many cool things, and she's always, her breweries, as many cool microbreweries are able to, experimenting with new brews and new styles and new ingredients. And she just makes a lot of cool beer. And I so wanted to go and go to the brewery and get a tour. And I'm hoping that someday that will happen again. Maybe next year. I know we said that in 2020. And it seems like it's all we say is we just keep going, next week, next year, it's going to happen. And we're still in this living nightmare. But we'll see. That's definitely would be the top of my list.
Okay, I think that would be an awesome trip anyway.
Good.
Yeah. So I hope you get to take that trip sooner rather than later. But Well, it's sometimes some things are worth the wait. I have one last question to bring up the rear, and it's actually from the president of the Book and Author Society, who has a burning desire for the quote that Sarah mentioned partially earlier.
If you want, I can actually pull it up because I know where it is.
Could you? I think it would be wonderful because apparently Kathy can't get it out of her brain. It's the quote about women and the apocalypse.
Yes. It's the one where I'm talking about Pandora, right?
It totally is, and I must have been reading it right at the start of all of the new Supreme Court cases and stuff, where I'm just like, yes, this is how we feel about all women all the time.
Yeah, it's if you want to look, it's on. Do you have an ARC or do you have a?
I have a full copy.
So it should be on page. Start of page or bottom of page 36.
All right, go ahead. Do you want to read a little snippet?
I can go ahead if you would like.
I narrate my own audiobook, so I don't normally do readings because I feel like
I'm done.
So I love hearing other people read. It's very exciting to me.
The tale of Pandora's box, or even just the phrase, is well known today. A woman unable to contain her curiosity opens a box containing all the evils of the world and unleashes them on humanity. But for thousands of years, the story has been misunderstood. It was translated incorrectly. The story is actually about a jar, not a box. In ancient Greece, a jar was a metaphor for a woman's womb. The Greeks believed that all the evil of the world came from a woman's opened womb, meaning a woman having sex. An unbound, uninhibited, uncontrolled woman was believed to be the source of all the bad in the world. Why would you let a woman have a drink? She might start the apocalypse or something.
Well, on that note, I will raise a glass to you, Mallory, and say thank you. And I'm going to pop back out and turn things back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Mallory. That's probably going to be my book and author email signature now. Oh, and I apologize to the rest of the book and author.
Not to toot my own horn, but it is pretty cool.
I don't know why it touched me so much. I am eagerly awaiting the new Natalie Haynes Pandora's Jar actually coming out in the US, so I don't have to go and order another book from the UK to clear customs. So maybe that's why it stuck with me. But it did feel super relevant today, where it feels like women are being policed as much as ever.
Yes, and it's scary to think that it's been going on for this long, and that really it's just it's a very ancient tradition of being afraid of women for reasons, it really comes down to men specifically being afraid that women are going to act like people and not property. So they've created these myths that, if women act like that, somehow all terrible things are going to happen.
Of course. I did want to touch on one more thing that you said during the Q&A that I thought was really interesting and really telling. You were talking about wanting to write these stories for all of the women that don't have the stories and all of those histories. I work at a local history museum. I shouldn't say local history as if it is localized history. It is just a Metro Detroit history museum. And it's a little large for our area. And we spend a lot of time collecting books for our research center on a variety of topics. We collect innovation. So that means a lot of different things. I call it trains to toilet paper, actually.
That
is our scope. But a lot of our collecting, especially when I started 5 years ago, I found myself buying a lot of biographies about women written for children because academics were not doing that research.
It's so funny you say that, because there was one woman I was thinking about writing a book about, and I was talking to my agent, and I was like, there's a children's book written about her, but not an adult book. Why?
Yeah, my well-renowned history museum has a small children's biography section because that is how we tell the stories of women, or that is how we used to tell the stories of women. So I wanted to thank you for writing stories like this. And we also have your Millicent Pierce book in our collection as well.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah.
I've actually just ordered this for work as well.
Creature from the Black Lagoon premiered in Detroit, so.
Yeah, so I'm so happy to continue to see things like this. And of course, books by people of color telling those stories as well. But there is such a cause for that history dying at an elementary school level, and telling the story of Harriet Tubman and what could basically be a sing-song voice to 5-year-olds and then never continuing. So to see stuff like this is so fantastic.
Thank you. That really means a lot.
Well, I do not have any other major questions, unless there's anything else you want to promote, your year-end podcast, anything like that.
No, I mean, this is my last virtual event for the year. So thank you for everyone coming and hanging out with us. I don't have Girly Drinks is out now, so you can check that out. Like I said, I recorded the audiobook. So if you want to hear me tell you the story of all these women, you can do that. You can listen to my podcast every Thursday. And if you are interested in keeping track of all this stuff, just go to MalloryO'Meara.com. I'm about to start taking a social media hiatus, but I do a newsletter, and there's a bunch of cool Girly Drink stuff on my website, as we talked about. So yes. Recipes and book recommendations and drink recommendations and playlists and stuff. So if you read the book and want to explore a little bit more, that's a great place to go. That's where all my stuff is on the internet. And while we were waiting, I added my name pronunciation to my website for all the poor people who have to do events with me.
We got there.
You did a great job.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Mallory. I'm so glad we were your last event of the year, and please enjoy your social media hiatus. That sounds very healthy, and we should all look into that, except you should all start it after you subscribe to all of the Book and Author social media channels. I'm sorry. It is a Monday evening for me here. We are at Book and Author everywhere. Mondays are hard in December. Most evenings are hard in December. Again, if you are looking for your holiday shopping, or you really want to read Mallory's book, because why wouldn't you? It's fantastic. We would like you to go to our bookshop.org link. It is in the chat right now. It will also be in any follow-up communication you get from this event. This event will then be on YouTube. You can share it with your friends. You can watch it while having drinks. It could be a fun girls' night. It could be a fun anybody's night. We can be a total gender neutral thing here. Totally check out our YouTube channel as well if you want to look at our past events. They're really cool. Our fall series was fantastic. We had so many fantastic authors, and we cannot wait to see you again in February for the start of our winter 2022 series. So subscribe to everything so you can see our lineup when we are fit to announce it, which again, like Mallory's upcoming projects, will probably be very soon. We're excited to share that with all of you. And Mallory, thank you so much. Have a great holiday season. Enjoy your social media hiatus, and have a great 2022.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.